The shrill wail of sirens sliced through the humid summer air, their sound reverberating off the looming skyscrapers of downtown Seattle. A crowd had already gathered at the park's edge, their hushed murmurs frantic, eyes shifting nervously toward the police barricade. Amid the confusion, a woman's scream pierced the chaos. "Where is he? Where's my son?" Sarah Mitchell, her body trembling, nearly collapsed into the arms of a police officer. Her 8-year-old son, Noah, had disappeared without a trace. One moment, he was playing by the fountain, and in the blink of an eye, he was gone. And just like that, the city came to a halt. It was happening again. 6 months earlier, Richard Hale had been sentenced for one of the most horrifying crimes in recent memory: the kidnapping and near murder of 7-year-old Emily Carter. His trial had dominated the news, and the case against him seemed ironclad. His fingerprints were all over the abandoned house where Emily had been found, his alibi full of holes, and his DNA was discovered on a piece of cloth used to gag the young girl. The public had been convinced. The jury had been convinced. The verdict had been guilty, and Hale was sentenced to life behind bars. So, why had another child vanished under eerily similar circumstances? And if Hale was locked up, then who had taken Noah Mitchell? Jack Monroe leaned against the cool metal of his desk, eyes fixed on the missing person report before him. His stomach twisted in that familiar way it always did when something felt off. With 15 years at the FBI, he had handled some of the most disturbing cases imaginable. But this felt different. Richard Hale was behind bars, the case closed, yet Monroe couldn't shake the feeling they had missed something, some detail that had slipped through the cracks. There were too many inconsistencies. First, there was nothing suspicious on Hale's personal computer, no disturbing search history, no hidden files, no encrypted folders filled with dark secrets. If Hale had truly been a serial predator, his digital trail should have been rife with evidence, but instead, it was pristine, unnervingly so. Then there was the timeline. Hale had no criminal record before Emily's abduction, no signs of violent tendencies, no psychological red flags. He was just a middle-aged man working a simple job at a hardware store, living alone in a modest apartment. He wasn't the type to orchestrate something so horrific, and now, with another child gone, the question Monroe had been wrestling with for months grew louder. Had they convicted the wrong man? Rex, the K-9 officer, perked up as Monroe passed by the training facility at FBI headquarters. The German Shepherd sat up straight, his dark eyes locking onto Monroe as he walked by. Rex had been the key, if you could call a dog a key, to finding Emily Carter. He had tracked her to that abandoned house, where she had been found battered and terrified. Now, Rex was something of a legend, a symbol of justice. Monroe had never been particularly fond of dogs, but there was something about Rex that made him pause. Maybe it was the way the dog always seemed so alert, so aware, as if he could sense things others couldn't. Monroe trusted his gut, and right now, his instincts were screaming. Something was wrong, and Rex knew it too. 2 days later, Monroe found himself walking through the decaying outskirts of Seattle, where aging buildings stood like monuments to a forgotten era. He was following a lead, a small one, but it was the only thread he had. It had all started with Rex during a routine patrol. The dog had suddenly stopped in front of an old warehouse on the east side. His ears had flattened, his body stiffened, and a low growl had rumbled deep in his throat. Monroe had never seen him react like that before, so now, here he was, flashlight in hand, stepping carefully over shards of glass and rusted metal, the door creaking open in front of him. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the musty scent of decay. The place felt wrong somehow. Monroe's gaze fell to the floor, where he saw a set of small footprints imprinted in the dust, too small to belong to an adult. A child had been here. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Richard Hale was in prison, so who was still out there? The rain had begun to fall, light at first, then turning into a steady drizzle that coated the streets in a slick sheen. Monroe gripped the steering wheel tightly as he drove through the shadowed alleys of East Seattle. His mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. The footprints in the warehouse had confirmed his worst fear. A child had been there recently. And not just any child. Based on the size of the shoes, it could very well be Noah Mitchell. But that wasn't the only thing that sent chills down his spine. The tire tracks behind the building, the faint smell of gasoline still hanging in the air, and the way Rex had growled even before stepping inside. Someone had been there, and they had left in a hurry. "Look, I don't want any trouble, okay?" Monroe's eyes narrowed as he focused on the man in front of him. Henry Wallace, a homeless man in his late 50s, had been living in a makeshift shelter just a few blocks from the scene of the abduction. He was the only possible witness, but getting anything useful from him was proving difficult. "We're not here to arrest you, Henry," Monroe said calmly. "We just need to know what you saw." The older man shuffled nervously, pulling his ragged coat tighter around his thin frame. His fingers fidgeted with the zipper, his eyes darting around as if he were searching for an escape. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," he muttered. Monroe leaned in closer. "Try me." Henry let out a long, resigned sigh and rubbed his face. "There were two of them." Monroe's pulse quickened. "Two?" "A van," Henry whispered, barely audible. "Everyone talks about the one that took the girl, Emily, right? The one Hale was supposedly driving. But there was another van that night." Monroe felt a cold shiver run down his spine. "Another van?" Henry nodded. "Black, no markings. Pulled up just minutes after the first one. I didn't think much of it at first. Figured it was just some delivery truck or something. But then," Monroe pressed, urgency creeping into his voice. Henry swallowed hard, glancing around nervously before continuing. "I saw the driver step out for a second, just long enough for me to see something. Something on his arm." Monroe leaned forward. "What was it?" Henry's eyes flicked to the ground. "A tattoo," he whispered. "A snake wrapped around the number. Sexton Dokas." A cold dread settled over Monroe. That symbol, he'd seen it before. The Serpents, a notorious criminal syndicate that had wreaked havoc on the West Coast over a decade ago. Human trafficking, drugs, weapons, the whole operation. The FBI had decimated their ranks with a series of massive raids 10 years back. Dozens of high-ranking members had been arrested, and the rest either disappeared or went into hiding. But if Henry was telling the truth, the Serpents weren't just still active, they were back. Back at FBI headquarters, Monroe paced the floor of the evidence room, his mind spinning. "Tell me you found something," he said to Agent Lisa Carter, the team's cyber specialist. Lisa adjusted her glasses, eyes fixed on her monitor. "You're not gonna like this," she said, her voice low. Monroe's stomach tightened. "Just give it to me." Lisa turned the screen toward him. "That tattoo Henry described? It's real. The Serpents used it as a rank marker. 89 refers to one of their highest-tier operatives. Whoever Henry saw wasn't just some low-level thug. He was a top player." Monroe clenched his fists. Lisa hesitated. "I ran some financial checks on Hale. Something's off." Monroe clicked on a new document, his heart sinking as he read the results. For the last 3 years, Hale's bank account has been receiving monthly wire transfers from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The amounts varied, but always between $5,000 and $110,000. Monroe's stomach churned. So, he was getting paid, he muttered, his mind racing with the implications. Lisa nodded. Yeah, and guess what? The account sending him money? It's tied to a shell corporation, one flagged years ago for connections to, you guessed it, the serpents. Monroe's breath hitched. Hale wasn't acting alone. Looks that way, Lisa confirmed. That changed everything. Richard Hale had been convicted, but what if he wasn't the mastermind? What if he was just a pawn, used by someone more powerful? And what if the serpents weren't just a thing of the past, still in business, still trafficking children, still operating beneath the radar? Monroe ran a hand through his hair. Damn it! His mind flashed to Emily Carter, the little girl who had barely escaped Hale's grip. And then Noah Mitchell, still out there somewhere, terrified, alone, waiting for someone to find him. He thought of Rex, the way the dog had reacted near that warehouse, how he had sensed something others couldn't. Monroe wasn't sure why, but something told him Rex wasn't just recalling the past. The dog was warning them about the future. The hunt wasn't over. It had only just begun. The old case files were scattered across Monroe's desk, papers layered upon papers, highlighted notes scribbled in the margins. The deeper he delved into Richard Hale's past, the more certain he became. Hale wasn't the true threat. He was just a small piece of a much larger puzzle. And then there was Joseph Clean, a name that had resurfaced during his investigation, a ghost from the past. Clean had been a constant on the FBI's radar, yet somehow he always slipped through their fingers. He had been linked to everything from arms dealing to human trafficking, but nothing had ever stuck. Now he was back. And if Monroe's gut was right, Clean was the one pulling the strings. Rex's ears perked as Monroe stepped off the elevator and onto the FBI's main operations floor. The German Shepherd was sitting at attention beside Lisa Carter, tail twitching nervously as Monroe approached. He's been restless, Lisa remarked, scratching behind the dog's ear. Ever since we left the scene last night. Monroe crouched down, meeting Rex's sharp amber gaze. You know something's wrong, don't you, buddy? Rex let out a soft whine, nudging Monroe's hand. Monroe stood and stretched his back. Then let's find out what, Rex, he said, tossing a thick file onto the conference table. Agent Patrick Reed, the FBI's top profiler, leaned forward and flipped through the file. Former military, he muttered. Special ops. Discharged under questionable circumstances. Spent the next decade running security for anyone with deep pockets. Cartels, human traffickers, you name it. Monroe nodded. Look at this, he said, sliding a printed bank statement across the table. For the last 3 years, Richard. Hale has been receiving monthly wire transfers, Reed exhaled sharply, from a shell corporation tied to the serpents. You think Hale was working for them? Reed asked. I think he was their errand boy, Monroe corrected. And I think Clean's the one giving the orders. Lisa, who had been typing away at her laptop, suddenly froze. Guys, we might have a problem. Monroe glanced over at her. What's going on? She turned the screen toward them. A grainy image from a gas station security camera filled the display. This was taken 2 days before Emily Carter was kidnapped, Lisa explained. Monroe's stomach tightened as he took in the image. A man, dressed in dark tactical gear, with a jagged scar running down his cheek. Joseph Clean, Monroe muttered. The man was less than a mile from Emily Carter's house. Monroe's SUV came to a screeching halt outside a dilapidated motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where people went when they didn't want to be found. The FBI had tracked Clean's movements over the past month, and everything pointed here. Room 207, Lisa confirmed through the earpiece. Monroe checked his sidearm. "Let's do this." Rex padded along beside him as they ascended the stairs, the dog's nose twitching as he sniffed the air, following scents Monroe couldn't even begin to track. The dog's muscles were coiled tight, instinct screaming that something wasn't right. Monroe felt it too. He raised a fist, signaling the team to halt outside the door. Silence. Then, a crash from inside. "Move!" Monroe barked, kicking open the door. The room was empty, save for a single overturned chair and a rope still dangling from its armrests. Clean had been here recently, Monroe said, scanning the room. On the mirror, written in red marker, were 4 chilling words: "You're too late." Agent Monroe paced outside the motel, frustration simmering beneath his skin. "He knew we were coming," Reed muttered, staring at the message scrawled on the mirror. Lisa tapped furiously at her laptop. "I'm pulling up traffic cam footage now. If he left in a car, I might be able to track him." Monroe's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. A blocked number. Frowning, he answered. "Monroe." Silence. Then a voice, distorted, mechanical. "You're chasing shadows, Agent Monroe." Monroe's grip tightened on the phone. "Who is this?" The voice chuckled darkly. "The man you're looking for isn't running. He's watching." Monroe's pulse quickened. "Where is Noah Mitchell?" The voice ignored the question. "You think Hale was the problem? You think Clean is the answer?" A pause. Then, almost amused, "You're not seeing the full picture." Monroe's mind spun. "What do you want?" The voice was silent for a long moment. Then, "Ask the girl." The line went dead. Monroe stared at the phone, his blood running cold. Emily Carter. What did she know? The Carter residence was still, the evening sun casting long shadows over the front yard. Monroe knocked on the door. A moment later, Sarah Carter appeared, concern etched in her face. "Agent Monroe," she said, voice tight. "Is everything okay?" "I need to speak with Emily," Monroe said gently. Sarah hesitated. "She's been having a tough time." "I know," Monroe replied, "but this is important." Sarah sighed and stepped aside. Emily was curled up on the couch, clutching a stuffed rabbit tightly to her chest. When she saw Monroe enter, she looked up, her small hands tightening around the toy. "Hey, Emily," he said softly, "I need your help." The little girl didn't answer, but her gaze flickered toward him. Monroe crouched down beside her. "Do you remember Richard Hale?" Emily nodded slowly. Monroe took a deep breath. "Was he alone that night?" Emily's grip on the rabbit tightened, and for a moment, Monroe thought she might say nothing at all. Then, slowly, she shook her head. Monroe's heart skipped a beat. "There was someone else?" Emily hesitated, then nodded again. Monroe pulled a photo from his pocket, a grainy shot of Clean from the gas station, and held it up in front of her. "Was it this man?" Emily studied the picture, her small fingers twitching around the stuffed animal. After a long pause, she slowly shook her head. Monroe's spine went cold. "Emily," he said carefully, "can you tell me what he looked like?" The little girl didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed a crayon and a scrap of paper. She began to draw, her focus intense. Monroe watched, his heart racing. A figure took shape, a tall man. And then, Emily added something that made Monroe's breath catch in his throat. A mask. The drawing was crude, but unmistakable. The man Emily had seen wasn't Clean. He was someone else. Someone they hadn't identified. Someone still out there, watching, waiting. The warehouse loomed at the edge of town, its rusted metal siding blending into the overcast sky. It had been abandoned for years, at least that's what the record said. But Monroe had learned that places like these always kept secrets. Rex's ears twitched as he sniffed the air, his body tense, alert. "This is it," Lisa Carter confirmed, glancing at her GPS. "Surveillance picked up Joseph Clean here several times over the past few months. Whatever he's hiding, it's inside." Monroe adjusted his bulletproof vest and exchanged a look with Patrick Reed. "Let's move." The team advanced, weapons drawn. The only sounds were the crunch of gravel beneath their boots and the distant hum of traffic on the highway. Monroe reached the side door and tested the handle. Locked. He nodded to Lisa, who stepped forward with a small device. A quiet beep, a soft click. The door creaked open. Darkness swallowed them whole. The air was thick with dust and something else. Something more sinister. Monroe's flashlight swept across the room. Stacks of old wooden crates, broken machinery, and discarded office furniture cluttered the space. But it was the basement door that made his stomach tighten. It was reinforced, with new locks. "This place wasn't abandoned," Monroe muttered. "It's still in use." Lisa knelt beside a control panel, typing quickly. "This isn't just a lock, it's a biometric scanner." "Can you bypass it?" Monroe asked, keeping his voice low. Lisa hesitated. "I'll try." Rex growled low in his throat, his nose pressed against the crack beneath the door. His muscles were coiled tight, his instincts screaming that something was very wrong. Monroe felt it too. He raised his fist, signaling the team to hold their positions. 15 minutes later, Lisa stepped back, triumphant. "Got it." The lock clicked open. Monroe raised his weapon and shoved the door wide. The basement was cold, not just from the underground chill, but from the weight of something unseen, something wrong. The walls were lined with shelves, each one holding boxes, dozens of them. Reed pulled one down, flipping it open. His face drained of color. Inside were files, photographs, names, and dates. Monroe's pulse hammered as he scanned the documents. Each one contained a missing child's information. Some were recent. Others went back years. Then he saw a single sheet of paper, different from the rest, a list. 15 names, Emily Carter, Emma Sullivan, and 13 others. Some names were crossed out. Monroe's stomach lurched. "Are these—" Lisa's voice cut through the silence. "If the names crossed out mean what I think they do." She swallowed, her voice tight. "Some of these kids are already dead." Monroe clenched his fists. "And the others?" Lisa hesitated, her voice barely a whisper. "Still unaccounted for." That meant they were still alive, for now. Then they found it. The hard drive. It was hidden behind a panel in the wall, wrapped in a plastic bag. Monroe didn't waste a second. He plugged it into Lisa's laptop. The files were encrypted, but one folder wasn't. Inside were audio recordings. Monroe clicked the first file. A distorted voice crackled through the speakers. "Hail, the Carter girl is secured." A pause, then another voice, a deep, cold voice. "Good. Transport her to the next location." Monroe's breath hitched. "That's him." Lisa stared at the screen, her expression pale. "The voice from your phone call." Monroe nodded. "The masked man." Reed frowned, his brow furrowed. What the hell does next location mean? Monroe's mind raced. If Emily had been meant to be transported, but Hale had gotten caught before it could happen, then there were other children, and they might still be in danger. The next recording sent a chill through Monroe's veins. The same voice, the masked man. "The FBI is closing in. We're burning everything, Hale and the others." A beat of silence. Then, "Eliminate them." Lisa's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God!" Monroe shot to his feet. "We need to move, now." Outside, the sky had darkened, and the wind carried the sound of a distant siren, an eerie soundtrack to the horror they had just uncovered. Lisa's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her face draining of color. "Monroe," she said. holding up her screen. A new message. No number, no sender. Just 2 words. Too late. Monroe's stomach dropped. The chain of shadows wasn't just an organization. It was still out there, watching, and they were already one step ahead. The cold wind whipped through the air as Monroe and his team sped toward the old dockyard on the city's outskirts. Rain battered the SUV's windshield, the wipers struggling to keep up with the deluge. Lisa sat in the passenger seat, her fingers flying over her laptop as she decrypted the final fragments of data from the hard drive. The message had been clear. Too late. But Monroe refused to believe it. Joseph Clean had led them to the truth, whether he'd meant to or not. His capture had unraveled a network far more complex than anyone had imagined. Hale had never been the mastermind. He was just another pawn in a much larger game, and the real threat was still out there. Rex sat in the back seat, his body tense, ears twitching at every sound. He could sense it. The air was thick with something dangerous, something unseen. Monroe knew better than to ignore the instincts of a trained K9. Lisa suddenly stiffened. "Monroe, stop the car." He slammed on the brakes, tires screeching against the slick pavement. "What?" He turned to her. She turned her screen toward him, her face pale. "The warehouse. It's on fire." Monroe's gut twisted as he followed her gaze out the window. In the distance, a dark column of smoke rose into the stormy sky. The warehouse they'd been headed toward, the one Clean had used, was burning. Someone was covering their tracks. Monroe gritted his teeth and floored the gas. When they arrived, the flames had already consumed most of the structure. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning wood and melted metal. Firefighters were battling the inferno, but it was clear the evidence inside was being erased. Rex barked sharply, straining against his harness as Monroe held him back. The dog was trying to pull toward the far side of the building. "Something's there," Monroe muttered, following the dog's lead through the smoke and flickering flames. He saw it. A single metal door, untouched by the fire. Lisa noticed it too. That's reinforced steel. Whatever was inside, they didn't want it destroyed. Monroe didn't hesitate. He kicked the door once, twice, until it gave way, swinging open with a metallic groan. Inside, the air was hot and filled with smoke, but the sight before them was clear. A chair, overturned. A broken set of handcuffs still attached to its armrests. Someone had been here, and they had escaped. Monroe's radio crackled. "Sir, we've got something suspect at the airport, attempting to board a private jet." "Joseph Clean?" Monroe's blood ran cold. "We're on our way." They reached the airport in record time. The private terminal was nearly deserted, except for a handful of security personnel and the flashing lights of FBI vehicles. And in the center of it all, restrained and smirking, was Joseph Clean. The moment Monroe stepped out of the SUV, Clean's gaze locked onto him. "You made it just in time," Clean said, his voice almost amused, "but not for the right thing." Monroe ignored him, signaling for Lisa to search him. She did, turning up nothing but a burner phone, a wad of cash, and a fake passport. "I have to admit," Clean continued, stretching against his restraints, "you're persistent. But you still don't get it, do you?" Monroe clenched his jaw. "What?" Clean chuckled darkly. "That you're wasting your time." He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "You think you've won. You think catching me means this is over." Monroe narrowed his eyes. "It means you won't hurt anyone else." Clean's smirk widened. "Me?" He tilted his head. "I was never the one you should have been chasing." A cold chill crawled up Monroe's spine. "Then who?" Clean's expression shifted, almost pitying. "Oh, Agent Monroe. He's already watching you." Lisa stiffened beside him. Who? Clean exhaled slowly, then smiled as if he knew something they didn't. Ask the girl. Monroe's stomach dropped. Emily Carter. She was the only one who had been in Hale's captivity, the only one who might have seen something Hale had never mentioned. Someone more powerful. Before Monroe could press further, his phone vibrated. A new message. No sender. Just 4 words. We are not done. Later that night, Monroe stood outside Sarah Carter's house. The porch light cast a faint glow over the front yard, illuminating the damp grass from the evening rain. He could hear the muffled sounds of the TV inside, the soft hum of life moving forward. But the case wasn't over. Not yet. And Emily had started drawing again. Monroe had seen some of her sketches, scenes from her memories of the room she'd been trapped in. At first, they were all the same. The cold walls, the dark shadows. But then, one detail changed. A new figure appeared in the background. A man, tall, standing in the doorway, watching. His face was obscured, but his presence was unmistakable. And in the latest sketch, the one Emily had drawn just last night, something new was added, a mask. Monroe exhaled slowly, staring at the dark horizon. Rex sat beside him, silent but alert. He could feel it too. The real monster was still out there, and the game was far from over. Subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories of resilience and hope. And don't forget to share this video with friends and family. Your support helps us continue this vital work, one life at a time. Let's keep the flame of compassion burning brightly, because together, we can make miracles happen. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.